Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And it's a great pleasure to be speaking here at the Niagara Foundation, not least because I have some contact in my last job with the Dialogue Society, which is a sister group in London, and had a very interesting day there once. I'll just say a few words very briefly about myself, just to sort of flesh out the biography that you read out, my official biography, which is quite dry. And then I'll say a little bit about the UK context. Then I'll say a little bit about what I do here. And then I'll keep that fairly short, and then we can throw it open to quick Q&A and discussion, which I always think is the most stimulating part of these type of events. I've been, as we were saying, Consul General since last July, but I actually have a much longer association with the US, in that when I was 19 and I just left school, I thought that the US was the most fantastic and interesting country that could possibly be. And I took the opportunity with two friends between school and when I started at university to drive across the US in a very old car, which we purchased in Virginia, drove to San Diego, up to San Francisco, and then back across the northern route back to Virginia. And I think there's nothing like trying to drive across the US in a very old and unreliable car. To give you two things. One thing is a sense of the scale and majesty of this magnificent country, because when you're broken down in Rapid City, South Dakota, you do realise that you're a very long way from anywhere else. But the other thing, I really took this away perhaps even more strongly, was a sense of the warmth and hospitality of the people of the US. Everywhere we went, we were treated with magnificent hospitality. We were invited into people's homes. We were always helped. We had wonderful conversations and contact. And I really came away with a very strong feeling that both in the physical sense and also in the sense of the people, the US was a country that I very much wanted to have more to do with. I've been lucky enough to serve in Washington during my diplomatic career, and I've been even luckier in the sense that I found a very lovely artist from Wisconsin who I married and has been my wife. So in a sense, coming back to the Midwest has been very much like coming home, because Teresa's family live just north of here, and it's been her having seen a lot of my family while we were living in London. I'm now seeing a lot of hers over here, and it's very nice to be able to redress that balance. My main job here is to promote Britain and British interests and the links between the UK and the US across 13 states. So I do the whole of the Midwest, from Ohio and Kentucky in the east, right through to the Great Plains of the Dakotas, Kansas, Nebraska in the west. And if you look at that area collectively, it's 70 million people, and it's an economy which is comparable in size to Germany. So I have a big-sized team here. I have 28 people in the consulate, and more than half of them are devoted to trade and investment. Because what we're really all about here is promoting the trade, the investment, the commercial links between Britain and the US. And those links are really very substantial. If you take just to give you one figure that sort of illustrates this, US investors into the UK, so Americans investing in Britain, provide over 1 million jobs, and there are over 1 million jobs provided in the other direction. And if you just take the state of Illinois, which obviously is where we all are, there are 55,000 jobs provided within Illinois alone by British companies, including really big names like HSBC, BP, Aviva, the list goes on. So Britain and America are already very important to each other's economies and prosperities, but obviously there's even more that we can do, and my team are out on the road every day, often with me with them, talking to companies, talking to private investors about what more we can do. And I'm happy to talk more about that later on, but that's the overall context. If we just look at what's going on in the UK, obviously anyone who follows British politics will know that since last May we've had a new government, but the point I'd like to make is that we have in a way a new kind of government, because what the British political system normally delivers from elections is one-party rule. So since the Second World War we've had either the Conservative Party or the Labour Party in power. What we have now, for the first time since 1945 and the wartime coalition, is actually a coalition. So we have the Conservatives in power with the Liberal Democrats. And in a way, the sort of idea of Conservatives and Liberals sharing power together is less extraordinary in the UK than it would be in the US, where Conservatives and Liberals are obviously at opposite ends of the spectrum. In the UK, they're sort of slightly closer together ideologically. But nonetheless, the coalition is a new arrangement for us. And to some extent, we're all sort of slightly working out how it works. But I think what I would say after nearly a year is that it's an alliance that has proved much tougher and much more durable than you might have expected. If I'd been told a year ago, before the election, that there would be a coalition, I would have thought, gosh, that'll be very interesting, and it'll be unprecedented, and I don't think it'll be tough for the parties to make it work. And I think what the experience of coalition has shown is that actually when you have two parties who have a good personal chemistry at the top between the leaders, and B, have a broad ideological agreement about what they're going to try and do, then a coalition can be an extremely robust and durable and tough arrangement. And that's what we're finding. The last year in government hasn't been an easy one. The government came in, as I'll say in a minute, with some pretty tough economic problems, but nonetheless it has really set to with a will, set out a plan and a programme, and it's carrying it out. So it's turning out politically to be a much more durable and, as I said, much tougher arrangement than one might have forecast. So it's a new arrangement. It's an interesting arrangement, but so far it's working well. But although the coalition is new, there's one thing that hasn't changed, and I'd just like to say a little bit about this, which is the security alliance with the United States. The alliance with the US has been the absolute cornerstone of British foreign policy since the Second World War. Obviously, the world at the moment the world is always a turbulent place, but I think at the moment, with everything that's going on, really from Yemen through to Libya, not to mention Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, you name it, the list just seems to get longer and longer. The world is going through huge changes. There are unquestionably opportunities in this as well as risks, but it is, we have some very acute security crises. And we are absolutely clear that these crises are better managed, better organised with US leadership and with a very strong security alliance between the US and the UK. And this remains, despite the newness of the coalition, the newness of the political arrangement, that the security arrangement with the US, the security alliance right across the fields of defence, security, intelligence, nuclear cooperation, those remain absolutely as central to our security as they ever were. And the government is absolutely committed to making the alliance with the US work. Then there is really no serious controversy about that in the UK. That remains the absolute bedrock of our foreign policy. And I saw in my last job, as we were mentioning, I was the head of the counter-terrorism department in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and I saw at first hand and actually helped to operate the very close security relationship between the US and the UK. And it's absolutely instinctual that the first thing that we do in London is to talk to Washington. And we do find, although clearly the US is a much bigger power on the world stage, we do find that confluence of views, the convergence of views, is very striking. And nearly always things work better for the US if they do things with the UK. So that arrangement, that relationship remains extremely strong. And as a sign of that, we are, by some margin, the second largest troop contributor in Afghanistan. We have over 10,000 troops operating in one of the most difficult parts of Afghanistan, in Helmand province. And that is really an earnest, if you like, of the seriousness with which we take our international responsibilities and our relationship with the US. And we see the same thing happening again in Libya, where it's been US and UK forces operating very closely together with, I'm pleased to say, the French, which is something, in a sense, new in the international scene, certainly new in recent history. But it's very good to see that we have a broader international coalition that also includes Middle Eastern members. But as I say, the core of that coalition is the US-UK relationship, and that remains absolutely central for us. But beyond the security challenges that we all face, the key challenges for us in Britain have really been economic ones. And there are just three things that I'd like to say about that. The first is that the government, when it came in last May, inherited a deficit of 12.5% of GDP, which put us right up in the European area with countries like Portugal and Greece in terms of our indebtedness. Now, there were reasons for this. We had a very large financial sector. Like financial sectors all over the world, our financial sector ran into serious problems in 2007, 2008, and we had to bail out the banks, which was extremely expensive, cost a lot of taxpayers' money. But nonetheless, even if you stripped out the financial crisis, there's no question that we were spending more than we could afford in 2006, 2007, and that was greatly exacerbated by the money that we had to put into the banking bailout. So it's perfectly clear that we needed to take serious action to reduce our deficit. As a medium-sized, large medium-sized, but nonetheless open trading economy with a floating currency, we could not afford to be in a situation in which we lost the confidence of the markets. So we had to take firm and decisive action to deal with the deficit, and that's what the government has done. Very soon after coming in, it announced a package of measures to deal with the deficit, which will mean that we'll go from last year, where we had a deficit of 12.5% of our GDP, down to the elimination of our deficit by 2014. Certainly the elimination of our structural deficit. There may be a very small cyclical deficit. And that is being done in two ways. The first way it's being done is by raising taxes, which is never popular, but the government recognised had to be part of the equation. And we're really doing that in two ways. We've increased consumption taxes. We have a thing called value-added tax, which has gone up from 17.5% to 20%. Not welcome, but it's happened. And as I said, it's a sign of the way that the coalition government is able to do difficult and things that are difficult politically. And we're also raising, or not raising personal taxes, but leaving personal taxes at the higher level where they were raised to by the previous government. So the natural instinct of a Conservative government would be to try and cut taxes. instead of which it's actually leaving taxes at the higher level that the previous government has had raised them to, particularly on the better off. So that is the way in which the tax side of it is being dealt with, and that will account for about 20% of the change that we're making on the deficit. But 80% is being done by a programme of spending cuts. And obviously I'm in the public service myself. I'm seeing, even in the Consulate in Chicago, we're seeing signs of a tighter fiscal climate. So that is trickling right the way down through government. And some very, very difficult decisions have had to be taken. Right across the benefit system, there are cuts to benefits, particularly to those that tend to be collected more by the middle class. So things like child benefit are being restricted. The way in which our universities are funded are being changed, which means that students are going to be paying quite a lot more for their education, and the students have made very clear in a series of vocal protests what they think about that. But nonetheless, that is happening. Defence, we've had to restructure our defence to deliver, try and deliver more capability or an equivalent capability with less resource. So right the way through government, what we've done is to take some pretty tough decisions on the spending side. And it hasn't been easy, but it is happening. And I think if I leave you with no other message this morning, the message I would like to leave you with is that the British government is absolutely clear and firm about tackling the deficit, and is doing so, and will accomplish its goals. As I said, it's not at all without political controversy in the UK. There's a lot of argument going on about the details of the cuts. But I think there is a consensus really right across the political spectrum, but particularly a consensus within the coalition that this is something that has to happen. And we've been reminded frequently and regularly by events in the Eurozone what can happen to countries that don't get a grip on their deficit. So we are doing it, and it will happen, and it's taking place. So I think what you will see in 4 years' time is, as I said, a Britain that doesn't have a deficit and does have leaner, restructured public services. And I think between here and there will probably be quite a lot of political controversy, quite a lot of demonstrations, quite a lot of public reaction. But I think no one should be in any doubt about the absolute determination of the government to make this happen, because unless we can sort out the deficit, then we won't be on a firm economic platform. And unless we're on a firm economic platform, then nothing else that the government does will really work. So that's the first priority. The second priority is that we are absolutely clear that the private sector has to be the basis for economic growth. I mean, it's very obvious that only the private sector can create economic growth, only the private sector can deliver new jobs. So what the government is doing is trying to make Britain into the best place in Europe to do business for the private sector. And there are two things I can tell you very briefly about that. The first is that we are reducing corporation taxes. I mentioned that we'd raised taxes on consumption and on the personal income, but we are actually cutting taxes on corporations. So we've already cut corporation tax from 28%. The last budget took it down to 26%, and in 3 years' time we'll have corporation tax at 23%, which will be the lowest of any of the main, the G7 group of the world's largest economies. So we will have a lower rate of corporation tax, and that will be accompanied by a real effort to strip out regulation, a real effort to reduce burdensome regulation on business, to reduce the time that it takes to start a business, to reduce the amount of regulation to which business is subjected, and to try and do everything that we can to encourage entrepreneurship and the creation of new businesses and the thriving of existing ones. And to give you an example of what that means, we're really addressing some of the deficiencies that we know exist in our education system. We've introduced a new apprentice scheme. We're trying to do more to make sure that school leavers are equipped with skills that they can use in the marketplace. So it's really a combination of reduced taxes, reduced regulation, and classic supply-side measures to make sure that businesses have the supply of willing and capable workers that they need. But the core point of all this is to make Britain the best place in Europe in which to start, grow, and have a business. And the third thing I'd like to say, really connected with that second point, is that we're very clear that international business is absolutely crucial to a thriving private sector. I said a little bit at the beginning about the very strong links that already exist between the Midwest and the UK, about the investment that Britain and America have in each other's economies. And we're very, very keen to see more of that. And as I said, that's really my core mission here in Chicago. But we think that we have a tremendous amount to offer on the international business as a base in Europe. If you look at the UK economy, we have a history of creativity and innovation. We've got a very strong research base, we've got very strong universities, and we have a tremendous history as innovators and developers of new economic ideas. So that's the first point that we offer to international business, and that's really part of the marketing pitch that we make, and I really shamelessly offer to you this morning. The second point I'd make on this is that we are, of course, right at the centre of the European Union. If you come in as an American business to the European Union, you have access to 500 million well-off consumers, to the world's largest single market. So we would argue that in the UK you have both the obvious advantages of the language, a very compatible legal system, a very business-friendly environment, but you also have access to the much wider opportunities that Europe can offer. And a lot of American companies have come into the UK, based themselves there, and then done what we really like, which is manufacture things in the UK and exported them out to the rest of Europe. And that for us is a double win, because we get the investment benefit when they come in, and then we get the export earnings when they export from the UK. So the more companies we can get to do that, the better, and an awful lot are already doing that very successfully. And then the third point I'd like to make about our economy is just that we still remain, people have this tendency to think about the UK as a service economy, and we are that, and we have a very large financial sector. It's obviously had difficult times, like everyone's financial sector over the last few years, but it is still a hugely important industry for us. The City of London is in many ways the world's most important financial hub. But on top of that, we do remain a very major manufacturing economy. One forgets that we are still well into the top 10 of global manufacturing worldwide. Obviously, manufacturing is growing very quickly in other parts of the world, including Turkey, but also including China and India. And of course, countries with the ability to offer competitive labour costs will continue to do well. But at the high end, the UK remains a tremendously successful manufacturing economy. One looks at iconic names like Rolls-Royce. I mean, the aero engines, not the motor cars, although both are fine products, but the aero engines are much more important. And we remain an economy that can really deliver high-tech manufacturing at the very, very top end. So that remains really, really critical for our economic future, and something that we can really offer to companies that are considering international investment. So that's really where I'd like to leave it. I hope I've given you some sense of what I do. As I said, security relationship, absolutely crucial. The main challenge is the government is focusing on economic, absolute determination to deal with the deficit, very strong commitment to encouraging and reinforcing the private sector, and a tremendously strong sense that the international role of business, the international aspect of business, is really critical to us and our economic future, and something else that we're very keen to encourage. So I'll leave it there, but very happy to discuss, debate, take questions on anything that I've said or on any other aspect of the United Kingdom. Well, I think anything that encourages sensible dialogue between people from different perspectives is a good thing. And Niagara provides a very good foundation to come in, or a very good forum for people to come in and discuss things, share views, share ideas, talk about the world as it is. And I find it very useful. I've really enjoyed my visit here this morning, and I've had some relations in the past with the Dialogue Society, which does a similar function in London and is a sort of sister organisation. So I warmly welcome the opportunity that it gives for discussion and sharing of views.